Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Yep, it's the world's most dangerous morning show, The Breakfast Club. Charlamagne the God, Angela Yee. I guess Envy had to step out, but we have a good brother in the building, man. He goes by the name of Attorney Ben Crump. He's not just a lawyer. He's an advocate for social justice. You've represented people like Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Stephon Clark, and you got a new book out called Open Season. Happy to have you here today, brother.
Honored to be here, and thank y'all for what y'all do for the culture. Angie, you know how I feel.
Yes, I've been wanting to get you up here for the longest, so I'm glad that we're able to make this happen. And I'm glad that you have this book out, Open Season. First of all, reading this book, right, there's so much information in here. And when you put it the way that you have, it's like the amount of injustices that have been done to Black and brown people is, like, you can't even, every page is like 10 different stories of us. Like you said, laws disproportionately affecting us and harming us. And you also talk about killing us spiritually and not just physically.
Absolutely. You know, the reason I wrote this book was twofold. Number one, Ben Franklin said that democracy is like two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know how that vote is going to go. But he said liberty is making sure that that lamb is well armed to protest the vote. And so we have to make sure young people in our community who are being targeted like the lambs are well armed to protest the school to prison pipeline, well armed to protest, you know, this racist Jim Crow laws like Stand Your Ground, well armed to protest the voter suppression, well armed to protest environmental racism where Charlamagne, children who grow up in South Central LA has a third of the lung capacity of children that live in Santa Monica, California, because all the toxic chemical plants are in our community, Angie.
Flint,
and they
Michigan.
legalize it. Yeah, Flint, Michigan, Newark, New Jersey, Puerto Rico. And so we make the case in this book very clearly that we have to show America the hypocrisy within the legal system and how they're using the law not just to justify the killings on the street, but more poignantly, how they're using the laws to kill us in courtrooms with these trumped-up felony convictions where 1 in every 5 Black men in states like Florida and Tennessee have felony convictions. And they're not very different from many of the other states. And the experts predict if this trend continues, 1 out of every 3 Black men in America will be convicted felons. And that is unacceptable when you think about all the collateral consequences that come with being a convicted felon. It's not that you're dead, but it's like you have, the Walking Dead. They just haven't given you the death certificate.
I agree with you when you say that we need to show America well, I agree with everything you're saying, but when you say we need to show America the hypocrisy of the judicial system, they know. They created it. Like, they don't care.
Well, you know, we think that a lot of times they know. But I have a lot of my law partners, some of them who are white, who are astounded by the things they see since they've been working with me in these matters of civil rights. You know, it's so deep, Charlamagne, when you think about when we were in Ferguson. And you all remember the killing of Mike Brown. And what really helped inspire me to write this book was the young people. They just refused to remain silent. And I remember specifically this one young brother who were out there when they had the National Guard with the assault rifles pointed at him. He walked right up to the gun. And he was yelling, and I was like, oh, my God.
No fear.
Yeah, no fear at all. And he said, no, go ahead and kill me. Kill me now. Y'all gonna kill us when the cameras go, so go ahead and kill me so we can show the world how y'all killing us. And I remember thinking, that is so important. The world needs to see how they're killing us because some of them don't understand. Right. They think that, well, it's not as bad as they say. You know, Crump and them, they just keep, trying to race bait and all this stuff. Look at the empirical evidence. I mean, don't take our word for it. Look at the fact that when you have Black people who kill people and say self-defense, stand your ground don't work for us.
Not at all.
But when it's a white person kill a Black or brown person, as long as they make sure we're dead, their stand your ground argument has a far better chance of success.
Look at the Castle Doctrine law. The fact that they even thought of giving Amber Geiger
Man.
Castle Doctrine in a house that wasn't hers.
Oh, man. What you talking about, Charlamagne? It was the most asinine thing I've ever heard of, that you get to have the castle doctrine, even though it's not your castle. It's both them jaws' castle.
You talk about that in the book, a specific situation, right? Where
Absolutely.
there was undercover police officers.
Oh, man. It is so deep. Trayvon Martin, Angie, was not my first time hearing Stand Your Ground. Trayvon Martin, because it was the #1 news story in the world and because it became the conscience for Black Lives Matter in America, everybody thought it was introduced to Stand Your Ground. But an old black man named Isaac Singletary was the first time I had ever been acquainted with Stand Your Ground, because we were trying to use it to argue when they had these undercover police officers come and set up drug deals near his property. He was an old black man who didn't play that in his community. Everybody in the projects across the street from him understood that Pops wasn't going to let you sell drugs on his property. And so he owned a house, and he had his birth house right beside it. So this Hispanic guy and this white guy set up shop. And when Pops came out there with his little 22 in his T-shirt that they call a wife beater on a Sunday afternoon, had his fried chicken still on the oven, he had his little 22, and he said, "Get the hell off my property." And the undercover police officers claimed that they identified themselves as police officers, which our experts said they would never do, because once they give up their cover, their cover is blown. And so what then transpired, even though this man had this little 22 and seemed like all they had to do was get off his property, they claimed that he shot at them, and that's where the story becomes convoluted, because, in the projects, everybody watching, and they said, no, the old man pointed the gun, but he didn't shoot. They were the first ones to shoot at him. They shot him. He backed up against the wall and then stumbled to his backyard, thinking that these drug dealers were coming to kill him. They called the SWAT team in, and they came and shot Grandpa 8 times, killing him.
After he had already been shot
After
initially?
he had already been shot, and they're on his property. And then we were arguing, stand your ground. And they said, no, stand your ground doesn't apply. And you say, hold on. Well, how does it apply when white people say that we felt in fear of our life and we defended ourselves, but yet when black people say it, it doesn't apply? That's the hypocrisy that we talk about.
We know the answer to that,
in open season.
Right.
No, that's just the foundation that America was built on: racism and bigotry.
Well, and it's this implicit bias that's pervasive. One of the things, the book, I believe, is a continuation of what happened in 1951 when the great Paul Robeson, who at the time was the most famous African American in the world, and W.B. Du Bois, they went over with other black leaders to Paris, France, to the Convention of the United Nations in the aftermath of World War II, where you had all these war-torn countries making petitions based on the killings and the atrocities that they were suffering from being genocidal activity. And they said, we charge genocide against the American government for the killing of Negroes. And they made the case, y'all, based on the killings, the lynchings, and the rapes that were happening daily in the 40s to Americans. And when they made that case, they used the definition of genocide itself, which are acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a group based on national, ethnic, racial, or religious identity. And I challenge anybody to look at this book and say we're not speaking facts.
So that's why you named the book The Legalized Genocide of Colored People.
Legalized genocide.
Like that word genocide was specific.
Very specific, because it's not that they're just killing us in the streets with these high-profile police shootings like Michael Brown, like Alton Sterling, like Philando Castile, like Pamela Turner, like Stephon Clark, like Corey Jones, like Walter Scott, like Jonathan Crawford, like Tamir Rice. I mean, the list goes on.
Atiana Jefferson. You can add her to that
Jefferson.
List, man.
I mean, in her own house. But it's not just those killings. What's far worse, I submit to you, Charlamagne, and what we make to the case in America, Angie, is the fact how they kill us every day in every city, in every state in America, softly in courtrooms where you see they're killing our young lambs with these trumped up felony convictions. And don't take my word for it. Just go in the back of a courtroom, any courtroom, and sit in the back and watch how when they have similar fact patterns of little white boys and white girls, and they have fact patterns to little black and brown children, you see the little white children get a slap on the wrist, and then they get escorted out of court to live the fulfillment of their destiny and achieve their American dreams. And these black children get taken to the corner of the courtroom. They get fingerprinted, handcuffed, and convicted of a trumped-up felony conviction, and I do mean a trumped-up felony conviction on some of the most unbelievable things you would imagine. But they never get the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of consideration, the benefit of possibility. Right. They have this felony conviction that they now have to wear like a cross on their back for the rest of their lives. And everybody says, oh, once you get a felony conviction, you can't vote and you can't serve on jury duty, you can't serve in the Army. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to a felony conviction. I mean, if you wanted to go to college, you can no longer get a federal grant or loan when you got a felony conviction.
You can't go through TSA pre-check.
Yeah. and Charlamagne, it's so deep, man. If you are trying to be legitimate and get a job to keep food on the table for your children, to keep a roof over the head for your family, to keep the lights on, man, all the jobs you can get, now that you have that felony conviction, they have been taken away from you. If you wanted to be a teacher, if you got a felony conviction, you can't get a certification. If you want to be a nurse, you can't get certified with a felony conviction. A real estate agent, you can't get certification. If you want to be a beautician, Angie, for sisters, many states won't let you get certified if you got a felony conviction.
Alcohol license, if you're trying to open up a bar or something.
I mean, they start taking everything away from you. And in fact, Charlamagne, if you are a convicted felon and you served any time in prison, you can't even get life insurance. It's like you literally are the walking dead. Damn. They just have not given you the death certificate yet.
I didn't know that.
So what we have to do is not let this racist criminal justice system continue to define young black and brown people. We have to say, no, we're going to define our people, and we're going to make sure they are equipped with the tools to know that this system is targeting them and is killing them softly.
Have you ever advised somebody to take a plea deal even if they didn't do a crime?
I have not, but it happens every day because when you think of the Hobson's choice that is presented before them, they have this jury of anything but their peers that are going to sit in judgment of them. And that's the game, Angie, because they say, well, you can risk 5 to 10 years if you go to trial, but you can take this felony conviction and we'll just give you 2 years probation. And you think,
I don't want to risk that.
I don't risk that, and I get to go home. But what you don't know is now you're in the system. And once they have you in the system, you can almost never get out of the system.
And you're thinking, I can't pay for an attorney.
Yeah, I can't pay for an attorney. The public defenders are overworked. The prosecutors get all the benefit. You know, a lot of the reasons I'm doing these TV shows and so forth is to try to change the heart and minds and the perception of this law and order mentality where we see on TV every day, law and order, where the prosecutor and the police are always right, and it's the little black and brown people who are always wrong. And as Malcolm X said, TV is one of the most powerful drugs ever created in the world.
The people who control the media control the mind of the masses.
Exactly. It controls your subconscious thoughts without you even knowing that you're thinking a certain way. So you go in that courtroom as a juror and you're thinking, well, the police don't ever lie. The police are fair and everything. And so you have over and over again these convictions of black and brown people. Like, man, it breaks my heart, and people just don't get it. When you consider black men in America only make up 7% of the population, yet we represent almost 50% of the people on death row. Yep. You have to scratch your head and say, well, it's either one or two things. Either black men are some evil, nefarious, criminal-minded people, or two, that the criminal justice system is broken and racist. And I refuse to believe that black men are any different from any other men out there. We're no better or no worse than white men or Hispanic men or Asian men. It's just that this racist criminal justice system targets us from birth.
It's amazing that we can see all of this genocide that the white man has done throughout the world, but yet we're the ones that are paying it as the threats and the violent ones.
Man, it's such hypocrisy. Tez McCorvey, Tesman Figueroa, and
That's
I,
my partner.
Yeah,
What up,
she
Tez?
loves you, man. I always talk about how my personal hero is Thurgood Marshall. As a civil lawyer, we can't control whether the person is convicted or not or anything. And Trayvon and Mike Brown and Tamir Rice, we did our job. We've never lost a civil rights case, but it's the prosecutors who have like a fish out of water experience when they are prosecuting white police officers for killing black people. And we have to use our platforms to advocate these injustices every chance we see them. And so we have to educate our people. Like, I honestly believe the government should not be allowed to make money to pay their bills from selling weed now when so many black and brown people went to jail trying to pay their bills by selling weed. And so what this book says is before the government can be allowed to make money for selling weed, they got to let all the black and brown people out of prison. And until they do that, we have to protest every day. And they say, well, y'all don't think it'll make a difference? I disagree. All the examples of our culture, of our history say when we speak up for our people, when we stand up for our people, when we fight for our people, it makes a difference, because if we don't fight for our people, ain't nobody gonna do it for us. Thurgood Marshall was told that when he was a little boy, he would never go to the best schools in America. He would never get to go to school with white children and everything because segregation was just the reality of life and we have to live with it. Well, he rejected that, and every morning he got up and tried to do something to tear down segregation. Well, that's what we got to continue to do every day. You don't have to be anything special, gifted. I mean, with social media now, you can go and you can make your statements known. I'm so proud of John Legend, what he did with, bail reform and stuff, just using his platform. What y'all do every day, Angie and Charlamagne, using y'all platform to speak truth to power, to defend the culture, because the culture is under attack. And when you think about, we talk about colored people, we talking about black, brown people. We're also talking about people from the LGBT.
No, it confuses us all.
LGBTQ.
We know who you're talking about. Salute to the gay community.
Okay.
Yes.
Because anybody who's been marginalized, disenfranchised, or dehumanized, the people who are suffering mental health crises.
That's right.
I mean, like Pamela Turner, that sister who was killed outside of Houston that Tez and I are working on. I mean, she's saying, Angie, I'm pregnant.
Right.
And the police still shoot her. He's standing on his feet. She's on the ground. He shoots at her 5 times. Not only did he not have any consideration for her, but he didn't know if she had life inside her, but she was dealing with mental illness. And every day this police officer would harass her. And it's just, this system not only condemns you if you're a person of color, but if you're marginalized in any way, and whether you live or die from a police encounter should not be based on the color of your skin or the status of your mental health.
Let me ask you a question. You talk about all these high-profile cases. We've all heard about them. They've trended on social media. How have these cases brought about a change in the justice system, if any?
Yeah, every step, the great Johnny Cochran said it's a journey to justice, Charlamagne. I think when you look at Trayvon, which was, the very definition of Black Lives Matter, #1 news story in the world where a black child was killed. You think about Mike Brown. Mike Brown in Ferguson was the impetus for these body camera videos. President Obama signed a bill to pay $50 million to local police departments to have these body cameras now. You think of Stephon Clark in California, even though the police officers didn't get charged, but the governor of California, Angie, has signed the most restrictive police use of force law in America, and I hope it becomes a trend, because what they said, Charlamagne, in California, when the police shoot a person, they now have to show that it was necessary. You can only kill or use lethal force when necessary. So that now means you have to show everything else that you tried to do before you use lethal force. So at the Botham Jones trial, when I said that this verdict was for Trayvon, this verdict was for Michael Brown, for Sandra Bland, for Pam Turner, what you really was saying, because those cases educated America, it put that Black Lives Matter in the stream of consciousness for America. It has an impact now on the judicial system, even though it is the judicial system, the executive branch and the legislative branch that have conspired through history of America to kill black and brown bodies. We are now starting to make a difference, because that's the whole reason this book was written, is to try to prevent the open season killings of black and brown and disenfranchised people, the marginalized people, the people who my grandmother called the least of these. This book was written to prevent the killings of them without anybody being held accountable. And the judicial system, who is supposed to be the safeguard, that I'm part of this legal system, we're supposed to be the safeguard, the rooster that guards the hen house. Many times we are the person who are promulgating the injustice. And that's what we got to fight against.
The police always claim self-defense and say they were unfair for whatever reason. And then when they bring that to the stand, like you said, the grand jury proceedings, they tend to side with the police officers because they feel sympathetic toward the police officer who they're like, well, I was scared for my life. And that's basically all a police officer has to say. Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of times they'll say, well, I didn't have my camera on, or they don't show like all the footage, and there's all these different scenarios that happen. They straight up lie. So what should happen to police officers when they lie, right? They should be convicted.
Absolutely.
Just like a citizen should be convicted and serve jail time.
Absolutely. Nobody should be above the law. And you're acting as my co-counsel now, Angie, because when you talk about those three magic words, I felt in fear, where the Supreme Court of the United States has literally given license to the police to justify any killing of a person, especially a black or brown person in America, by saying what they literally wrote out in Graham v. Connor and Garner versus Tennessee. This is what the police officer has to say. I felt in fear. I felt threatened. And if they say that, Charlamagne, they say, oh, you can't Monday morning quarterback the police. You wasn't there. And that's what they keep saying over and over again. Thank God for the advent of technology, because for years, black people, Hispanic people kept saying, the police brutalized me, the police shot me, they tortured me, and nobody would believe them. But now
they
you have this
the drugs
video.
On me, and people did not believe that.
But video is not a catch-all, because Alton Sterling, Philando Castile,
he did what he was supposed
video
to do.
and it didn't work then. So we have to keep screaming at the top of our lungs. We have to make sure that we hold a mirror to America's face. This book is a wake-up call that it is the law itself that they are using to legalize the killings.
What's going to happen when civilians start shooting police officers out of fear? Because let's be for real, self-preservation. I get upset when I see police officers in those situations, but I understand it a little bit, because it's just self-preservation at the end of the day. You want to make it home alive, but that person on the other side wants to make it home alive too. So what happens when that person shoots a police officer out of fear?
Yeah. And leading to that, you speak facts, Charlamagne. When you think about how many black and brown people the police kill every year, opposed to how many black and brown people shoot police. I mean, it's so disproportionate. If anybody should be afraid, it should be us of the police. The police should never be afraid of black people shooting them, because it's very rare that it happens.
Right.
But you pray and hope that the rule of law prevails, because unfortunately, we don't have more guns than them. We don't have more instruments of violence. And I believe honestly that it's about making sure our children are more intelligent than their oppressors, those who would seek to oppress us. That's the only way we win this war. We would never win this war with violence. We would never win this war with guns. We only win this war with intellect and diplomacy and courage. Martin Luther King said that the coward asked the question, is it safe? He said expediency asked the question, is it politically correct? He said, vanity asked the question, is it popular? But conscience asked the question, is it right? And there comes a time when we all must do what's right. And I believe it's right that we got to stand up for our children. We got to speak up for our children. We got to keep fighting for our children, because if we don't, they have no hope. Thurgood Marshall, and I always say this, and Andrew, you've heard me say this, Thurgood Marshall said that the basis of the American Constitution is simply this, that a black baby born to a black mother, the most uneducated black mother, the most inarticulate black mother, the most impoverished black mother, has the same exact rights as a white baby born to a white mother, the most educated white mother, the most articulate white mother, the most affluent white mother, just by virtue of that baby drawing its first breath as American. But Justice Marshall said, I know that's not the case in America today, but I challenge anybody to say that's not a goal worth fighting for. I challenge anybody to say that's not what makes America the great beacon of hope and justice for the rest of the world to marvel. So when we stand up for the Trayvon Martins of the world, and more importantly, the unknown Trayvon Martins of the world, what my grandmother, bless her heart, says, the least of these, when we stand up for them, what we are really doing, Charlamagne, is helping America to live up to its creed, helping America to be that great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. But most importantly, what we are doing, Angie, is helping America to be America for all Americans, and to believe in the Declaration of Independence.
That wasn't written for us, though.
Yeah, but
all of that stuff was written when we were 3/5 of a human being. I almost feel like we got to go change that shit.
The white male landowner.
You know what I'm saying?
You're absolutely right. Hey, but you know what's so deep, Charlamagne? They recite it all the time. I don't know if they believe it. We got to.
They do amongst each other.
Yeah, but what we got to do is say, just don't recite the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. Start acting, doing stuff to act like you believe it. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that their Creator endowed them with certain unalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you think about equal justice under the law, why can't that be for all Americans, America, if you're going to say you are the great moral standard bearer for the world?
What do you do when people are scared to call the cops? Like, we look at the Tatiana Jefferson case where the neighbor's like, I feel like this is my fault because I tried to do the right thing. I saw the door was open. I called the cops, and now she's gotten killed by the cops inside of the house.
That's a deep question, Angie, because we have to make, it's like Thurgood Marshall said, the Constitution wasn't written for us. You're absolutely right, Charlamagne.
It actually said we were 3/5 of a human being.
It said we were 3/5 of a human being.
Does it still say that?
No, it doesn't say that anymore. But, you know, Thurgood Marshall said, but we're going to make it our Constitution because we are Americans too.
I don't want to call the cops for any reason.
We got to make the police respect black lives. And the question came up in another interview. They said, well, why do you think the police shoot black people? Is it because they think black people are more violent than white people? Or is it because you think that they just don't value black lives? I don't know what the answer is other than this here. We got to make them not shoot first and ask questions later when they interact with people of color. We got to there's a judge that we talk about in the book. She is on the 5th District Court. And a lot of people say, oh, Crump, man, you're going to get in trouble for saying this. Well, I didn't go to law school to be a little hush puppy. I went to law school to be, a speaker of truth and speak truth to power. This white federal judge, it is reported that she said at a conference where she didn't know anybody was going to call her out, she said black people and Hispanic people are more predisposed to commit capital felonies in her mind. So she comes in thinking that, Charlamagne, if you're accused of a crime, you're guilty. You did it. And she said, Angie, which blew my mind, she said that, so when she issued out the death penalty to them, she is helping them because it gives them an opportunity to make peace with their God. And this is a lady who is one step removed from the United States Supreme Court, and she sits in judgment of black and brown people every day.
And
she was
she's
the
a federal
chief
judge.
She was the chief judge of the federal district at the time. After this controversy came out, they removed her from being the chief judge, but she's still on the bench, and she still has these, shall I say, Trumpian
Donald
opinions.
Trump has added 150 like-minded people just like that woman to the federal court since he's been in.
And that is our battle. We cannot let these enemies of equality win. We have to use the law as an instrument of good, and we can do it. I believe that with everything in my heart, y'all. I think about all these examples of people. If I can give a quick little history lesson.
Please.
Brigadier General Benjamin Butler, who was a Union general during the Civil War. Black people had already dealt with so much injustice, so many atrocities. But when the Civil War broke out and they took all the women and started sending them down south away from their men, that was the last straw. They said, well, we really don't have anything to live for. We're going to risk our life and everything to get our freedom. And they got to the Union side, crossed enemy lines. And the law, you're talking about legalized genocide. The law, Angie, in 1850 said when a black person escaped, you by law had an obligation under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 to return that slave to their master. Mm-hmm. And you know, many of the generals during the Civil War, when black people escaped, they returned them to the slave masters on the South that's fighting against them. So Benjamin Butler, who was an attorney, he said, well, they count black people as property, right? And so we claim property as contraband. So when these black people escape across the enemy lines, I'm going to not follow the law of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, but I'm going to follow the Contraband Act of War that says I'm under no obligation or duty to return contraband for you to use against me in a time of war. And so many people believe erroneously that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation. But Abraham Lincoln didn't free anybody, because if you read the Emancipation Proclamation, he only freed the people, the slaves who were in the southern states that he had no control over anymore because they had succeeded. It was Benjamin Butler using the law as an instrument for good that freed hundreds of black people, because when he refused to give them back and said that we're going to start using you all to help us make weapons and we're going to pay you, black people started escaping by the thousands right there to the Hampton Roads, Virginia, and it became really one of the first independently free black townships in America, and it gives rise today to one of the great historically black colleges and universities, Hampton University. And so
DJ Envy would have loved to have been here to hear that.
And so nobody can tell me when we use the law as an instrument of good what impact it could make. Benjamin Butler, I probably never could have fathomed this black university that we're going to be educating the hearts and minds of black children 100 years later, when he said, I'm just going to use this law because I'm going to be more intelligent than my opposers, and I'm going to say the Contraband Act says I don't have to give the slaves back to you. Abraham Lincoln wasn't happy about that, but it became the prevailing law once you do it. We just have to have the courage and the intelligence to dare to be better than America is being now.
I want to talk to you about Trayvon Martin, because a lot of your critics suggest that you lost the Trayvon Martin case. Can you explain the difference between a civil rights attorney and the prosecution that are charged with finding the defendant?
And thank you for asking that question, Charlamagne, because we have to understand that we're all in this battle together. And Trayvon, parents and I, we talk all the time. They weren't even going to arrest Trayvon's killings till we started advocating. But when you go back and watch Rest in Power, the documentary about Trayvon, you see that it's the prosecutors are the only people that can put people in jail. You didn't have no control over that. We have absolutely no control. In fact, they put me out the courtroom because they thought I had too much influence. And so it's one of those things, Charlamagne, that we have to make sure like Malcolm X said, that the media and the demagoguery will have us cheering for the people who oppress and kill us and are opposing the people who are trying to help us. Yeah. I mean, it's like Harriet Tubman. I freed 1,000 people, and I could have freed 1,000 more if they knew they were slaves. And so when we think about Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or any of these cases, we have to remember it's the prosecutor who has to be held accountable. Think about what the prosecutor did in Mike Brown. Right. We talk about it a lot in the book, how he just changed the rules completely when he did the grand jury proceeding for the killer of Michael Brown. I mean, he let everybody testify.
People that didn't even see or witness anything say, somebody told me they saw.
Yeah, he let the murderer.
Darren Wilson, let's say his name.
Yeah, Darren Wilson.
George Zimmerman too with Trayvon. We gotta say their names.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlamagne. He let the killer, Darren Wilson, of an unarmed teenager testify for 3 hours in front of a grand jury, and they didn't even cross-examine him. Now, let's examine the hypocrisy for a second. And a black guy named Johnson was convicted of a crime, spent 7 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. At the time when he was arrested, Angie and Charlamagne, he said, hey, I'm innocent. I can prove I'm innocent. Let me go talk to the grand jury. Let me present my case. They wouldn't let him do it. So he went, didn't take the plea, and he was convicted, spent 7 years in prison before his lawyers could get him out. And then they said, we're going to sue the prosecutor and them for falsely not giving me my rights, denying me my constitutional rights. It went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court of America. Justice Anton Scalia, one of the most conservative justices we've ever had, he wrote the opinion. He said that the basis of the grand jury proceeding is not the opportunity for the accused to present their case or to offer exculpatory evidence or even to testify. The purpose of a grand jury proceeding is simply to lay the foundation for which charges could be brought. And he said, based on that this brother who was wrongfully convicted for 7 years had no right to appear before a grand jury. Now, when Michael Brown was dead on the ground, this prosecutor, he just changed the rules. He said, no, we gonna let everything in. We gonna let people who support Darren Wilson come and testify, people who support Michael Brown come and testify. We just want to be fair. We just want to be equal. We just want to be fair. And all that sounds good if you don't know the system.
Right.
But he had never done that in 28 years. So when he changed the rules, when Michael Brown was lying dead on the ground, does that mean that he was unfair to all the black and brown people in St. Louis County who he had in prison for decades before this? He never let them have the evidence come that would exonerate them or exculpatory evidence, as we call it in the law. He never did that. So they changed the rules when it's us. And then the black people say, oh, the civil rights lawyers didn't win the case. They just gonna overlook this man?
Right.
I mean, and then they not even gonna go vote?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like one of those things, it'll make you go crazy. And I have to say this, Charlamagne, Angie, black people, when we get the jury notification, you gotta answer the jury duty call, the summon. One of the hardest things to do as a black lawyer is to go in a courtroom with your black client, and the only other thing black in the courtroom is the judge's robe, and think you're going to get equal justice.
Right.
Well, what's the point of saying jury of your peers if they're not going to really give you that?
Exactly.
Even if we don't show up, we got to go find the people, go find other black people.
Man, we got to do every church, every fraternity, every sorority, when you're talking on TV, when you're doing lip service, every chance we get, we got to say, you know, if you had black people on Trayvon's jury, if you had black people on Philando Castile's jury, just that one voice in the room make them change the whole conversation. I mean, just, if you there, Angie, they can't talk about it the way that they normally talk about it because you understand Trayvon's life experiences, his culture, his community. Understand that if he smoked marijuana, that does not mean that George Zimmerman had the right to murder him.
Even hearing Atiana Jefferson had a gun in her house. So the fuck what?
Exactly.
What does that mean?
It's the intellectual justification of discrimination, and it's the law and the courts that are doing it. And that's what we keep arguing in this book. because it's just like Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois did. We got to let them see how they're killing us, because if we can't get justice in the courts of law in America, we got to make our case to the court of public opinion for the world. But it is changing. Atiana Jefferson's murderer
really?
was convicted.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
Or arrested.
He was arrested and charged
Amber
with murder.
Geiger was convicted.
Amber Geiger was convicted only for 10 years. And I'm still pissed about that as one of the lawyers.
I was going to ask you that. So you
family.
think because of those convictions and the arrest, you think we're witnessing the beginning of a change?
I believe so. I believe so, because what Trayvon did, what Mike Brown did, what Stephon Clark, Alton Sterling, all these cases did, it raised the consciousness level to say, don't believe forensic file mentality or law and order mentality that the police are always good and that black and brown people are always bad. You know, when he used to have a show on Fox News, and I won't call his name, the Spin Factor, we were always...
Bill O'Reilly? Why you don't want to say Bill O'Reilly then?
Hey, man, I'll be giving credence to people.
He don't want to speak his name.
Yeah, but we would always say something where we would sit down and he would say, well, Ben Crump, you're a good lawyer, you're an honorable lawyer. Do you mean to tell me that you think all police officers are bad people? Because, you know, the majority of them are good. And I would look right back at him, Charlamagne, I say, do you think all black people are bad people? Because the majority of them are good. Wouldn't you agree? Because we can't let them have the high ground on morality.
That's right.
They can't say the police up here and little black and brown people down here. It got to be equal. And we got to keep using whatever blessings that God has endowed us with to speak truth to power.
It's just so crazy to me. They've murdered so many people. We just celebrated the life of a murderer yesterday with Christopher Columbus. They do this to us all the time, but yet we're the bad guys. I'm just saying.
We came to work and it worked, and it was a regular day.
We didn't enslave people. We didn't kill the Native Americans. How we end up being the bad guys?
Oh, man, we talk in the book on the Racism Kills, Chapter 1, about this whole notion of slaves being different in America than any other place, how you became chattel property, that you can never be free. Because in the Caribbeans and so forth, it used to be you were a slave if you would not accept Christianity or until you paid off your debt. But in America, in the Caribbean, they said, well, hold on, this slavery is the best thing that ever happened. I mean, when you think about business, if you can control your costs of labor, I mean, you can reap untold fortunes. And so they didn't change it, Charlamagne, because they said, hold on, what do we have on these black people who are the strongest people who can survive anything, survive the Middle Passage, survive, you know, the slave castles in Ghana and the Senegal. What is different about them than any other thing that we can see? It's their skin color.
Right.
And just like zebra can't change its stripes, these black people, if we say they are damned, that they're always going to be slaves just by the fact that they are secondary citizens, that they're beneath us, we can keep this institution of slavery going forever. And so the universities like Harvard and Georgetown, all these institutions, Wall Street, that made untold fortunes off of slavery, we put in the book the reason why they don't want to come to terms with what they did and how they benefited is because they then would have to pay reparations. And boy, if they had to pay reparations, they would go broke paying us what is due to us for what we contributed to America. Even life insurance was built on the whole notion of slavery. I mean, there was no such thing as life insurance until they started insuring slaves as property on slave ships. And then when they got on the plantations, they said, if my a slave die, I lose my property, I want to insure that, Angie. And so now, if you die, I get $1,000 for you because I was counting on you for my crop and my profit. And so that then evolved into what we know as life insurance. And so the Equitable and, you know, the Hartford, all of them in Connecticut, they literally was built on slavery. Right. So we got to speak truth to power. And in the open season, we keep trying to do that. We talk about how Harvard was just a little known college, but because Lawrence and Lyles, they ran the cotton textile factories, even though they went from the South, they made all the money in the world off of the cotton off the plantations. I mean, that's how America became this financial juggernaut from nowhere. Remember, we were in our infancy, but then we became this financial juggernaut off the backs of black people picking cotton. And then on top of that, Wall Street was created based on those Boston textile factory owners. So everything goes back to how America benefited from slavery, and they still continue to benefit in many ways from slavery. Oh, the prison industrial complex is an extension. Slavery by any other name is just the same, like my sister
13th Amendment.
Michelle Alexander says so eloquently in her book. And so it's these things we continue 70 years later, we charge genocide.
You quote, I only got a couple more questions. You quote Frederick Douglass as saying it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. So how do you build up, black kids in a culture with so much racism and when their skin color is such a risk to their livelihood?
Absolutely. Two things I want to say to that, Charlamagne. The first thing is we talk in the book about younger, stronger slaves. And it's really profound as a father of a 6-year-old daughter, and I had 2 adopted cousins who I raised. They're 20 and 25 now. But little girls, Angie, the highest percentage of people being incarcerated in America today, the fastest growing percentage, is black and brown women. So that means my daughter, your daughter, they have targets on their backs right now. It's not just the little boys anymore. It's also our girls. And what they're doing is direct filing our children as adults. And you look at the statistics where it's 7-1. They don't direct file white children, but minority children who are 15, 16, 17, 18, they're charging them as adults. They go to adult prisons, not going to the juvenile detention facilities or getting a slap on the wrist. They go to real life prisons. And so then when they get out of that real life prison, the chance of rebuilding them is almost impossible now. Mm-hmm. I mean, their innocence, their youth has been stolen from them by a racist criminal justice system. But what we have to do over and over again, or even worse than that, we point out in the book that the suspension rate from daycare and kindergarten is equivalent to the incarceration rate of black people in America. So our children are being suspended and kicked out of school. Just imagine that. What can a 3-year-old or 4-year-old do to make you kick them out of school?
Right.
But the statistics don't lie. They're there, and we offer this empirical evidence. And so what we have to do is encourage our children every step of the way, reinforce them with educational opportunities. So we have to sue like they're doing in Michigan to say that we have a right to literacy. And it doesn't matter what some federal judge says. As you pointed out, Donald Trump is putting all these federal judges in power. We have to, like Trayvon, make our case to the court of public opinion, and the wheels of justice turn slowly. Like Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And so when we talk about our black and brown children, I have a poem in this book that everybody keeps talking about already called The Black Pledge of Allegiance. And it starts off, it says that today's another day in the struggle for the liberation of black people. This liberation demands revolution. This revolution lives within me. I am the hope of the slave, the antagonist of the white supremacy conclave. I am the definition of ebony, a deep, dark, black, durable wood that protects everything in my neighborhood. And it goes on to talk about we got to say those things every day to our children. We got to reinforce them that they are just as good as anybody else and that they cannot be defined by this racist criminal justice system that is going to continue to try to define them, because the prison industrial complex is an extension of slavery, and 1 out of every 5 black men are going to be labeled a convicted felon. And we have to tell society that it doesn't matter how you try to define our people. We still believe in our people. We still believe in our children. We're not going to give up on our children. And just because Leroy or Junebug or Shaniqua got a convicted felon, we still welcome them with open arms.
Mm-hmm.
Man, Attorney Ben Crump, the book is out right now.
Yes.
Open season, legalized genocide of
The
colored
first thing
people.
I thought when I was reading this book, this woman had came up to me one time, and this is a crazy story, but she was a drunk white woman, and she was like, I don't understand this whole Black Lives Matter thing. Shouldn't all lives matter? And I really tried to explain things to her, but the next time somebody asks me a dumbass question like that, I'm going to be like, you need to get this book by Attorney Ben Crump called Open Season, just so they can actually read that for themselves and see all the different, all the facts, because it's all facts. It's real cases. You discuss things that have really happened, the ins and outs of it, and just what goes on in the court system, what goes on with the grand jury proceedings, what's going on in these very specific cases, and I appreciated it. It was a lot of information to take in at once, and it's going to make you say, damn.
Well, I want to say this, an open invitation to you and Charlamagne and DJ Envy. I know we're doing the book signings and stuff tonight at the Strand Bookstore with Sunny Hostin. Your girl Charlamagne, she made sure
Right.
I said that. And in Brooklyn tomorrow, we're going to have book signings. But with this book, hopefully enough people will go out and buy it, where 70 years later, that you all can come over to Geneva, Switzerland with me. We can go to the United Nations Committee, and we can present the case that they are still killing Negroes in America.
Oh, I'm all for that.
Both
Damn.
inside
I'm
go.
and
definitely
more
down for that.
poignantly,
Now, see, that's
in the
action. I like that
courtrooms.
type
Absolutely.
of shit.
Yeah, and so we plan a date for all your Breakfast Club audiences. We gonna take.
I'm sure you got a committee for that already.
There's a committee for that, and we're working on. We took Mike Brown's parents over to Switzerland before the United Nations. But
I got a few more people I'd like to add to that committee just to talk to you. I think that should definitely happen.
So we're gonna go and present just like Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois when it made the case that they're killing black people every day in America, and it's more poignantly not what they're doing in the streets, but how they're killing us in the courts. And the data is there. We have empirical evidence. Now, like I will say this in conclusion, President Truman and Eleanor Roosevelt was pissed at the black people going to air their dirty laundry to the world. So they're going to be mad at us, Charlamagne
That's
and
okay.
Angie,
And
when
we
we
can
going
talk
to
about
say
this whole opioid
America
crisis and how that's okay and that's a rehab situation and they need help. But then you talk about the crack epidemic and how that was criminalized.
And go make the case. So in the next 12 months, let's schedule to do this. I know everybody's busy. We have contacts with the committee, and this is how the revolution begins.
We never too
Let's
busy
do
for
it.
liberation, my brother.
Blessings.
My man, Attorney Ben Crump. It's the
Thank you
Breakfast
so
Club.
much.